I often, to introduce the Gonzaga Socratic Club, give a spiel about about C.S. Lewis's presiding over the Oxford Socratic Club. It is our kind of inspiration. But I'll just point out that in addition to being a professor, a don, as they would call it, over across the pond, Lewis, of course, wrote popular novels, including the enormously popular Chronicles of Narnia series. And so even in addition to our connection to the Oxford Socratic Club, we have a connection through Lewis of exploring and investigating connections between popular culture and religion, and secularism in particular. We're very happy tonight to have Kevin Decker from Eastern Washington University. He's been at Eastern since 2005, and even if we have friendly rivalries of all kinds with our fellow institutions here in town, it's lovely to have philosophers nearby who can come and present to us and share ideas with us. So we're pleased to have him here. Decker has been at Eastern, I said, since 2005. He specializes in social and political philosophy, American pragmatism, and philosophy and popular culture. And by the way, if you're interested in this stuff, I would just say take a quick look over at the Eastern Washington faculty website and look at all the cool and interesting stuff that Professor Decker has been working on with articles and also edited and co-edited anthologies on pop culture topics such as Breaking Bad, Star Trek, which he's going to speak about tonight, Star Wars, Doctor Who, South Park, and Ender's Game. That's only a partial list, right? So there's even more to whet your interest and appetite. So take a look at that. Tonight, Professor Decker is going to be speaking on Star Trek, religion, and secularism. So let's welcome him here to Gonzaga.
Thanks for coming out tonight. I also appreciate Gonzaga's philosophy department, which I love to advise students to look at, and also the Faith, Film, and Philosophy series that you do here. So I'm just going to be up front with you. I didn't shave today. I was actually working on the paper until the 11th hour, and then the 12th hour. And so, as you see, I was able to wear something Star Trek-y, but not dress up. So I apologize to you. Philosophers are slobs. But I do have video, which is always good, right, to break up the monotony of, let's say, a Charles Taylor sentence. Okay. Nobody without Taylor. Charles Taylor, but yeah, Charles Taylor's sentence/book. He has long. Let me start with a quote from David Gerrold, who is the famous writer of probably the best-known classic Star Trek episode, The Trouble with Tribbles. Gerald was interviewed, and this interview posted online said, "When in doubt, Gene Roddenberry always had Kirk get into a fight with God." As the creator of Star Trek, Gene Roddenberry in the 60s was in touch with the spirit of the Enlightenment, with its emphasis on reason, progress, and individual self-determination. But he also benefited from a climate favorable to challenges to traditional religious outlooks. American life in the late 1960s wasn't short on spirituality, with flower power, instant karma, and even an entire summer of love. Yet the public's commitment to treating social norms and good government as based on a morality guaranteed by divine order was challenged just as much by seismic changes in the nature of religious practice itself in America of the time, as it was by Vietnam and soon after Watergate. In the 60s, religious diversity increased substantially in the United States, and the decade witnessed an emerging religion of international interdependency. That was the outgrowth of the dread of global nuclear holocaust, which you see in a lot of classic Star Trek episodes, as well as growing ecumenical cooperation between religious traditions, against the background of the civil rights movement and the Vietnam conflict. Quote, "Theology became primarily an ecumenical matter of social activism and involvement and theological thinking became largely a reflection on social change. God became the instrument for social change, a further symptom of an emerging secularism in religion. That's from England and Burns' Contemporary American Theology. Roddenberry's science fiction vision of the future rejected what Roddenberry saw as the monstrous moral implications of a creation myth in which, quoting Roddenberry, an all-knowing, all-powerful God creates faulty humans, then blames them for his own mistakes. That's Gene Roddenberry for you. Not the kind of person you want to invite to a party, probably, but that's neither here nor there. Star Trek's central character, Captain James T. Kirk, was created to be a paradigm of the anti-authoritarian, individualistic, skeptical, and libertarian mindset that helped popularize the term secular humanism in the late 60s and early 70s. This mindset, in turn, was the product of the disenchantment idea of the world perceived to come along with the rise of industry, technology, war, and atrocities like the Holocaust. So how is Star Trek emblematic of secularism? Politically speaking, Trek embraces an idea of political power, on the one hand, used for the common good, including the securing of important freedoms for all sorts of alien races. But also, that political power does not need, in the Star Trek universe, a transcendent higher law or power to guarantee its legitimacy. Second, in terms of the future society, the post-apocalyptic, by the way, and a lot of people forget that Star Trek takes place after World War III. That's very clear in its history. In terms of the society it portrays, Star Trek envisions an expanding moral order that may include, but doesn't ultimately depend upon, religious truths to sanction its normative framework. The popularity of the show and its several movie and television spin-offs proves, Roddenberry thinks, and again I'm quoting Roddenberry here, that the much maligned common man and common woman have an enormous hunger for brotherhood. They are ready for the 23rd century now, and they are light years ahead of their petty governments and their visionless leaders. Maybe he was nicer in the morning. I don't know. The view of the individual in Star Trek is very much that of the liberal democratic society, theory, with the communitarian bonds of duty, shared hardships, and common missions providing a kind of social glue. In the movie Star Trek First Contact, Captain Picard tells Lily Sloan, a woman from the 21st century who survived that war that I just talked about, that, quote, the acquisition of wealth is no longer the driving force of our lives. We work to better ourselves and the rest of humanity. These, then, are the philosophical dimensions of secularism that permeate Star Trek. In their short runs, both the classic show, which ran from 66 to 69, and the animated Star Trek series. How many people have seen anything from the animated Star Trek series? Pat yourself on the back, especially you. Especially you. But given who your dad is, that's entirely surprising. The animated Star Trek series, 1973-74, those two, if you take them together and look at all the episodes, they boast no fewer than 15 encounters across the series with would-be gods. That, by the way, is 18% of the total episodes of Star Trek. These aliens with godlike powers are interested in subjugating the Enterprise crew. It is by far the most popular reoccurring motif in the show before Star Trek The Next Generation. And so, I want to show you kind of a paradigmatic one of these, not only because of the interplay between the mortals and the immortal over there, Apollo, a god who Kirk and the crew encounter on a deserted planet and who wants to basically make them into his worshippers, but also because of the dress style, right, in Star Trek. William Ware Tees, and he has the appropriate name, is in charge of these very revealing male and female costumes, and they show up in almost every episode. They were the reason why your grandfather watched this.
I know everything you do. I try to be compassionate toward your kind.
You know nothing about our kind. You know only our remote ancestors who traveled before your tricks. Your tricks don't frighten us, neither do you. We've come a long way in 5,000 years.
But you're still of the same nature. I can sweep you out of existence with a wave of my hand and bring you back again. I can give life sake. Do you have any plans to bring the rest of your people down? Be sure your artisans bring tools. We'll need homes.
And you will supply the herds of sheep, and the pipes we will play, and the simple skins we'll wear for clothes.
You will dismantle your ship for the supplies you need. And I'll crush its empty hull.
I have learned to be patient. I shall be patient no longer.
So that was one of the most memorable, I think, for many people. Who Mourns for Adonis is the name of the episode. It's from 1967. But beyond the classic series, these themes of religious belief, freedom, authority, secularization appear in Star Trek The Motion Picture and Star Trek V, The Final Frontier, and they run through many Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, and Enterprise storylines, each of which adds a layer of complexity to the answer to the question, what is the relationship between faith and secularism in the future society that Star Trek depicts? The aspect of the debate about the promises and pitfalls of secularization that interest me personally centers on the question about whether widely held religious beliefs should be institutionalized within political, social, and economic structures. This section is, I love to take section titles from actual dialogue if I can. And so this one is an exchange between a crew member and Kirk. The crew member says, I never met a god before, and Kirk says, and you haven't yet. What exactly is secularism? Contemporary secular humanists and the positivists of days of yore valorized secularism as a positive force, changing society, culture, and politics in the name of reason. Today, we should be more careful about characterizing it in such a simple way. Charles Taylor, who has probably written more cogently about the wider impact of secularization than any other philosopher, notes that there are at least three senses of secularism, at least that he pursues in his very large book, Secular Age, which is a good read, but an even better door property. One of these is the fact that, quote, Taylor, whereas the political organization of all pre-modern societies was in some way connected to, based on, guaranteed by some faith in or adherence to God, or some notion of ultimate reality, the modern Western state is free from this connection. He also talks about a second sense, a more social sense and less political. In its second sense, Taylor says, it's the falling off of religious belief and practice. And as a Canadian, it's interesting to note that he sees the United States as a striking example of this. We were one of the first societies, he notes, to separate church and state, but we're also the Western society with the highest proportional amount of religious belief and practice. Taylor spends much of his time in the massive book, A Secular Age, though, explaining a third notion of secularism that's highly relevant for the connection here with Star Trek. Has anybody here ever heard of, in the context of Star Trek, IDIC, infinite diversity in...
Infinite combination.
Good, she does know it. I had to leave off just to make sure. Infinite diversity and infinite combinations. Excellent. You get a gold. You get one of these if I had one. Okay, good. I mean, just a little sticker. Because, you know, the t-shirts, that's something on. Mr. Spock's philosophy is infinite diversity and infinite combinations. Taylor writes this, the shift to secularity in a third sense consists, among other things, of a move from a society where belief is unchallenged in God, and indeed unproblematic, to one in which it's understood to be one option among others, and frequently not the easiest to embrace. All of these senses of secularism center on religion, but exactly what is religion in its wider role in society? Robert Audi's work on religion in the public sphere isolates 9 distinctive features that I think are useful. First of all, religion in the public sphere is constituted by belief in one or more supernatural beings. Second, a distinction between sacred and profane things. Third, ritual acts focused on these objects. 4, a moral code believed to be be sanctioned by the god or gods. Fifth, religious feelings like awe or mystery that tend to be aroused by sacred objects and during rituals. Six, prayer and other communicative forms of conduct concerning the gods. Seven, a worldview according to adherents, a significant place in the universe. And eight, a more or less comprehensive organization of one's life based on the worldview in 1 through 7. The ninth one, then, is a social organization bound together by 1 through 8. I don't claim that that's an exhaustive list, but it's useful for philosophy when I think about religion in the public sphere. Notice that those in favor of a secular society could agree that 1 through 8, that I said earlier, are important. They could agree with believers who favor an active role in the public sphere for public beliefs and attitudes. But they differ about 9. Remember that 9 claims that the social organization is bound together by practices such as prayer and the distinction of sacred objects. The political friction over the place of religion in the public sphere has to do with conflicts between political democracy, government of, by, and for the people, under republican or parliamentary institutions, and civil liberties, under which all individuals and groups have the right to free speech, due process of law, and equality before the law. Freedom of and from religion is an important civil liberty, yet some uses of that freedom can endanger political democracy in turn. Now, a popular but ultimately unhelpful way of framing this debate that I'm sure is not popular here is in terms of religion versus reason, right? Everyone, even the most evangelical of religious fundamentalists, sees their strongly held beliefs as rational. But I want to suggest instead that political debates about secularization, like really all political exchanges, should be seen as attempts to define what Benedict Anderson called an imagined community. An imagined community is a cultural framework that has authority because it provides a taken-for-granted system of reference against which so-called politically rational claims are judged. Its shape is negotiated by voices both inside and outside the community that it depicts. In Star Trek, for example, Starfleet personnel often find themselves as outsiders in imagined communities, and they may find it difficult, in fact, to sort out the line between religion and politics in many societies. Part of the reason for this is that some of them are at a level of development where there can be no separation between the two, to conceive of them correctly. For example, from the classic series, there's not a very great episode, but it's got an interesting idea in it. It's an episode called the Omega Glory. And Cloud William, in this episode, the leader of the tribe of Yangs, treats an ancient U.S. flag as sacred, as literally a religious object, not merely an object of patriotism. And he excoriates Kirk. Freedom? You talk of freedom? That's a worship word. Gang worship. You're not a gang. You will not speak it. The politics of the Yangs and their enemy, the Combs, is a thinly veiled, stagnated version of the Cold War opposition between Yankees, gangs, and communists. But as the lifeblood of a more vigorous imagined community, political life represents what Paul Klein defines as, quote, a structure of the imagination that makes sense of experience by embedding it in narratives. There are many such narratives in any nation that don't all cohere with each other. Why should they? Why should they be expected to? In the Omega Glory, Kirk points out that the principles of freedom and equality that the Yangs actually worship are spelled out in the U.S. Constitution as applying to everyone. They have a derivative version of the U.S. Constitution, is what they're working from on that planet. And so Kirk diagnoses an incoherency in the Yangs' imagined community that makes possible peace with the Combs. Similarly, unless we're willing to countenance complete political relativism, we should treat politics philosophically by looking for fatal incoherencies in political narratives premised upon religion or any other comprehensive worldview. In the original series, Roddenberry's voice, secular voice, as I mentioned, is often heard speaking through Captain Kirk. Kirk emphasizes the core value of free striving that animates the Federation's imagined community. And he does this when he confronts patronizing godlike beings such as Apollo, who we just just saw, Trelane, who's from a famous episode called The Squire of Gothos, Landru from Return of the Archons, and despite his affinity for humankind, the Megan Lucian in the Magics of Magus 2, and yes, here now I am putting in a footnote in my paper to an animated Star Trek episode. Never thought I'd do that in my life. The Magics of Magus 2. He descends to greet the Enterprise crew by saying, "Ah, humans, lovely, primitive humans, can't you do anything right?" Kirk's famous line from Star Trek V, The Final Frontier, "What does God need with a starship?" is a classic opening line of criticism for somebody like Kirk that seizes upon the apparent incompatibility between divine power and the personal traits of whichever godlike creature is confronting Kirk that week. In the same regard, Captain Jean-Luc Picard and the Enterprise D crew can't make much sense of celestial beings they encounter in the Next Generation. From the justice machine of the Edo god to Q's efforts to put humanity on trial, to a creature called Nagilim's casual disregard for human lives in a pocket dimension of another episode. These antagonistic encounters, symbolic of Roddenberry's own hostility to organized religion, I now treat, after having published a version of this in the Ultimate Star Trek and Philosophy, I started thinking about this and I go, these hostile encounters are, at best, a view of human flourishing in which humans flourish as an agonistic process, right? So Kirk believes that somehow religion provides too many certainties, too many constraints, and that one is required to suffer in order to flourish, right? So that's at best. At worst, I'm prepared to call Kirk a Nietzschean, at worst. That is, despite any charms it might have for the Nietzschean Kirk, religious authority is inevitably tyrannical, and Federation citizens like the notably non-religious Kirk and Picard shouldn't turn their back on the progress in society that's been made up until their time in terms of secularization. This attitude is what makes episode endings like the one I'm about to show you from Bread and Circuses, which I think is a 1968 episode, both surprising and difficult to reconcile with the show's broader ethos. Here is the ending of the episode Bread and Circuses, which has an alternate Roman Empire on a human planet flourishing in the 20th century.
Captain's log, third day 4041.7. Note of condemnation, engineering officer Scott. Despite enormous temptation and strong personal feelings, he obeyed the Prime Directive. His temporary blackout of the city below resulted in no interference with society and yet saved the lives of myself and the landing party. Thank you, Captain.
Gentlemen, Captain, I see on your report pledges were still I am sorry. I like that huge sun worship. I wish we could have examined that belief of his more closely. It seems illogical for sun worship to develop a philosophy of total relativity. Sun worship is usually a primitive, superstition religion.
I'm afraid you have it all wrong, Mr. Spock, all of you. I've been monitoring some of their old-style radio waves. The Empire spokesman trying to ridicule their religion. But he couldn't. Well, don't you understand? It's not the sun up in the sky. It's the Son of God.
Caesar and Christ, they had them both. And the word is spreading only now.
Philosophy of total love and total brotherhood. It will replace their imperial Rome. But it will happen in their 20th century.
Wouldn't it be something to watch, to be a part of? To see it happen all over again.
Well, let's hope the people on that other planet are mistaken, because if you have a whole new incarnation and a whole new revelation, then that's just uncomfortable for everybody, right, Scott? The militant agonism and hostility of Roddenberry's Star Trek toward religion began to be complicated and softened as his influence on the Next Generation show in the 1980s was tempered by producers like Jerry Taylor and Ronald D. Moore,
If you don't recognize those names, Jerry Taylor went on to basically design and conceptualize the show Voyager, Star Trek Voyager, which has a lot of strong female characters in it. It's very, in many ways, the most kind of tolerant and integrative of religion of the Star Trek series, I think. And Ronald D. Moore, of course, did the new Battlestar Galactica. I don't have to say anything about religion in Galactica, but there's a lot going on there. So there is an episode from early on in The Next Generation called Who Watches the Watchers that I'm going to let you watch now. This is a particularly important episode that takes the dynamic of Roddenberry's hostility, almost Nietzschean hostility, and turns it on its head by placing Jean-Luc Picard in the role of an ersatz deity to the proto-Vulcan people, the Mintakans. Scrambling to undo the cultural damage wrought by the exposure of a Federation observation post, the Enterprise crew returns one of the injured natives, Liko, to the surface after failing to wipe his memory. So this is what you never want to have happen. Rescue a native, take him up to the starship where he or she sees all this incredibly advanced technology, screw up the memory wipe, and then send them back down to the planet to worship you, perhaps. I don't know. After the failed memory wipe, Liko believes he's been to the Mintakan equivalent of heaven, which is governed by the Picard, and who also gave him back his life. And after Liko tells his story, both enthusiasm and skepticism about the return of the old gods in Mintakan culture is raised in this secular community. When Counselor Troy, posing as a Mintakan native, is seized, Picard must decide with the anthropologist Dr. Barron whether to risk further cultural contamination by beaming down to rescuers. This is a clip from, I think, 1989. Who Watches the Watchers?
Doctor, you believe the Mintakans are capable of harming Counselor Troy?
Well, they are not normally a violent people, but these are extraordinary circumstances. They're trying to comprehend what they believe to be a god.
Recommendations?
The Mintakans wish to please the Overseer, but they can only guess what he wants. They need a sign.
Are you suggesting?
You must go down to Mintakan 3.
Masquerading as a god? Absolutely out of the question. The Prime Directive
It has already been violated. The damage is done. All we can do now is minimize it.
by sanctioning their false beliefs.
By giving them guidelines, letting them know what the Overseer expects of them.
Dr. Bannon, I cannot, I will not impose a set of commandments on these people. To do so violates the very essence of the Prime Directive.
Like it or not, we have rekindled the Mintakans' belief in the Overseer.
And are you saying that this belief will eventually become a religion?
It's inevitable. And without guidance, that religion could degenerate into inquisitions, holy wars, chaos.
Horrifying. Dr. Barron, your report describes how rational these people are. Millennia ago, they abandoned their belief in the supernatural. Now you are asking me to sabotage that achievement, to send them back into the dark ages of superstition and ignorance and fear? No. We will find some way to undo the damage we've caused.
Yeah, his face at the end says you can't put that genie back in that one. Picard's criticism in this scene have teeth because they're still underpinned by Roddenberry's view that his production teams did not, quote, accept the myth that the television audience had an infantile mind. This view is what's missing in the newer Star Trek films. So yes, I'm criticizing J.J. Abrams' Star Trek films right now. Compare Picard's serious, thoughtful reaction to this situation in Who Watches the Watchers to the way in which the sight of the Enterprise by the Nibiru creatures in the teaser for the newest one, Star Trek Into Darkness, is played up for laughs. This comparison makes sense of James Hunt's critical comment about the new films. For its hardcore fans, Star Trek doesn't have to be about a specific crew or certain aliens or a particular starship. At its core, it has to be about how the application of reason, knowledge, and understanding in the face of the unknown can make the universe a better place. wonder you think of Abrams' movies, they weren't about that. If longtime fans don't like the current incarnation of the Star Trek, it's because the current incarnation doesn't resemble Star Trek. That's James Hutt from denofgeek.com. It's very difficult to imagine J.J. Abrams' mainstream incarnation of Trek as engaging controversially with serious issues of religion and culture, as we see here in the Next Generation. Let's talk a little bit about creationism. Let's take a contemporary example. One of the many attempts to kind of force Christian doctrine into the mold of a science is to lump it under the name of creationism. And many of these creationist theories, there are about as many as you can count, if not more, are considered by many to be a faithful account of the origin of the universe, yet empirically supported cosmology and the science of evolution place substantial obstacles in the way of rational belief in some, if not all, of these accounts. By using political levers to introduce creationism as an alternative to empirical science in both traditional public and charter schools, creationists are actually diluting its students' understanding of the significance of the scientific method in favor of a view that ultimately leads, under conditions of religious pluralism, to complete epistemic relativism about human origins. If the biblical account of creation is suitable for instruction as science, then should schools, for example, avoid arbitrariness by teaching every creation story in science classrooms, such, for example, as the Greek mythology that Trek speculates may have been inspired by powerful extraterrestrials like Apollo we saw visiting Earth millennia ago. This would, of course, leave little time for actual science to be done. I want to show you a clip from an episode here in just a second that illustrates that particular conflict. Trek engages with creationism in Deep Space Nine, which is my favorite of the series. It's also the Trek series in which an alien society's religious interests and the Federation's secular commitments create the most friction over the course of 7 seasons. In the premiere episode, Commander Benjamin Sisko assumes command of a former Cardassian space station orbiting, at least for now, the recently liberated planet Bajor. Almost immediately, he's told by the Bajoran Kai, which is a position akin to something between the Pope and the Dalai Lama, that he's the emissary of the prophets. Sisko is the emissary of the prophets, and he's been foretold in Bajoran scripture. Sisko reluctantly tolerates this exalted status, hoping that doing so will help further Bajor's admittance into the Federation, which is what he's mainly interested in. Deep Space Nine's first season ends with a version of the creationist controversy erupting on the station, when the power-hungry Vedic named Wynn and other Bajorans boycott the physics-based teaching about the aliens in the wormhole. These aliens are precisely the creatures that the Bajorans worship as the prophets. And they call the wormhole a celestial temple. So here's a little clip that frames Star Trek's own version of creationism in the schools.
I'm not exactly surprised.
You knew this was going to happen?
A confrontation like this was inevitable. Sometimes I wonder if we'll ever find the common ground we need to bring Bajor to the Federation. Major, would you join us? We've been talking about an incident this morning in school.
I heard. Vedic Wynn's been meeting with some of the Bajoran civilians about it.
What do you know about her?
She's from an Orthodox order. She has some support to become the next Kai. Probably not enough. The question is, how much support does she have on this station? She's lying? You can't possibly believe teaching the facts about the wormhole amounts to blasphemy. I think some revisions in the school curriculum might be appropriate. You teach a lot of Bajoran children. I'm not going to let a Bajoran spiritual leader dictate what can or can't be taught in my classroom. And maybe we need 2 schools on the station. One for the Bajoran children and another for the Federation.
If we start separating Bajoran and Federation interests...
A lot of Bajoran and Federation interests are separate, Commander. I've been telling you that all along.
Nobody's saying that there can't be spiritual teaching on the station, Major. But can it be in addition to what's taught in Mrs. O'Brien's classroom?
But if she's teaching a fundamentally different philosophy, I'm not teaching any philosophy. What I'm trying to teach is pure science. Some might say pure science taught without a spiritual context. is a philosophy, Mrs. O'Brien.
My philosophy is that there is room for all philosophies on this station. Now, how do you suggest that we deal with this?
I'm not sure you can.
That's one of the reasons why I like Deep Space Nine, is they often say, I'm not sure you can do anything about this. Sisko, who respects Bajoran faith, responds to his son Jake's aspersions that belief in the prophets is stupid by saying to Jake, you've got to realize something, Jake. For over 50 years, the one thing that allowed the Bajorans to survive the Cardassian occupation was their faith. The prophets were their only source of hope and courage. According to the Deep Space Nine mythology, the prophets exist in a timeless state in the wormhole, allowing Sisko to make a compelling argument to Jake in favor of Vedic Wind's religious interpretation. Jake says, but there were no prophets. There were just some aliens that you found in the wormhole. Sisko says, to those aliens, the future is no more difficult to see than the past. Why shouldn't they be considered prophets? Jake asks, are you serious? Sisko replies, my point is, it's a matter of interpretation. Further confirming their unique status, according to Sisko, the prophets are able to communicate accurate future knowledge to the Bajorans through their hourglass-shaped orbs that have been sent to Bajor over the course of millennia. These orb revelations are important to the wider role of religious belief in society because they provide one answer to what Michael Martin asks concerning the justification of actions, particularly public policies, according to the authority of divine commands. Martin writes that this sort of justification, quote, supposes that morality is based on God's commands, but the question arises of how one knows what God's commands are. There are three issues to consider. First of all, there are several apparent conflicting religious sources of God's commands, the Bible, the Quran, the Book of Mormon. How does one choose the correct source? Second, even within the same source, for example, the Bible, there seem to be conflicting moral commands. Third, there are different interpretations of the same command, each, for example, thou shalt not kill. That's from Michael Martin's rather big book of arguments about atheism. Even if we were sure that our religious leaders were in contact with divinities that knew facts about our future, there would still be a question about the human interpretation of what these facts mean. Thus, any citizen could still challenge these interpretations despite their alleged authority. If there were no other evidence confirming a particular interpretation of an alleged divine revelation, purported knowledge about the future would have no more political legitimacy than any other empirically supported claims. This fact alone doesn't do enough to provide any moral argument, though, that political and social decisions should be made increasingly on a secular basis. For this, we actually need to look at another fine Deep Space Nine episode called Accession from the 4th season of Deep Space Nine. The setup is this. One of Bajor's greatest poets, Coram Ron, has disappeared a long time ago. He emerges from the wormhole, or the celestial temple, in a light ship. He's been gone only a few days in his own subjective time, but he's missed more than 200 years of Bajoran history. He's missed the Cardassian occupation of the planet, he's missed the Bajoran resistance movements, and he's also missed Bajor's initial steps toward membership in the Federation. He soon says that the prophecy about the emissary doesn't apply to Sisko, it rather refers to him, that a certain interpretation of Bajoran prophecy better fits him than Sisko, and Sisko, always a reluctant religious figure, is happy to relinquish the title. Here's my last clip for today. This is from Accession.
Hey, Joe. Come to see the photo speak.
The emissary's first public appearance, I didn't miss it.
I'm surprised to hear you call him that.
Why? Coram Ron is a great man. He's been with the prophets for over 200 years, and now they sent him back to us.
Yes, but 2 days ago you believed Captain Sisko was the emissary.
Well, he made it clear he wants to step aside.
Does that mean he never really was the emissary?
No.
But they can't both be.
I don't know anyone from Neono.
Forgive me, Major, I don't mean to be difficult, but Your faith seems to have led you to something of a contradiction.
I don't see it as a contradiction.
I don't understand.
That's the thing about faith. If you don't have it, you can't understand it. And if you do, no explanation is necessary.
Ever since the prophets returned me to my people, I've asked myself the same questions over and over. Why did they keep me with them for so long? Why did they return me to my people now? And now know the answers. Bejor suffered a great wound while I was with the prophets. Because that's their occupation. Bejor that I've returned to has lost its way. People no longer follow the path the prophets have laid out for them. They no longer follow their degenerates. Artists have become soldiers. Priests have become merchants. Farmers have become politicians. We must heal the wounds of the occupation. We must return to our degenerates. We must reclaim what we were and follow the path the prophets have laid out for us. It is their will that farmers return to their land, painters to their canvases, priests to their temples. If we do this, if we follow our degenerates, then Bejor will flourish again and become the green and peaceful land I remember. It will be as if the occupation never happened. By returning to our degenerates, we will have erased it forever.
Yeah, of course, the degenerates are a caste system, an ancient caste system on Bejor. And, it's not a strictly religious idea at all. Plato suggests that in the Republic, Chinese dynasties flourished under it. And the great thing about Deep Space Nine is it's not at all painted to be anything wrong whatsoever. It's just something that doesn't seem to fit with, for example, Major Kira there wanting to do the job that she chose rather than her family would do. Accession isn't merely about castes, but it's also an allegory about how narrow religious education and practice can debilitate civil society. In concentrating solely on the teaching of sacred texts and religious ceremonies as their main source of information and culture, some future citizens will be robbed of the cultural resources that make civil society a better place in which to live and work. The contrast in the minds of fundamentalists between the inerrancy of the Bible, or Quran, versus the falsehoods and distractions of secular culture is held by them to be a basic value-laden distinction between sacred and profane culture. The humanist Corliss Lamont believes, however, that the right of access to and appreciation of a wide variety of cultural resources, the sacred and profane in music, films, books, and public events, is in fact implied by our rights under the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. Lamont writes, "In my judgment, civil libertarians have stressed too much the undoubted fact that freedom of expression is the best way for men to arrive at the truth. The justification for free speech goes deeper than that. For the realm of significant meaning and cultural creativity is far wider than the realm of truth. Novels, poetry, and art do not need to be true in a factual or scientific sense. The human imagination cannot permit itself to be fettered by fact." I'm going to skip to the last part because I'd like to save time to discuss stuff that you're interested in. At the end of accession, Coram and Sisko confront the wormhole aliens / prophets together, and the Sisko is named by them as the true emissary. Coram is sent by them back to his own time, his memory of his time in the future erased. What best qualifies Sisko for the role, at least from the perspective of his friends on the station, is his ability to synthesize his personal respect for faith traditions with his own record of secular decision-making and policy creation in an effort to actualize their shared goal, Federation membership for Bajor. Cisco's experience, in turn, is based in the Federation's tradition of secular democracy. This tradition urges every one of us to examine religious faith in our society in the light of one undeniable fact about all civilizations, as true today as it will be in the 24th century, that we are faced with the quite elementary and quite staggering anthropological fact that there are thousands of religions with conflicting revelations, most of them claiming ultimate truth in matters of religion. Which one are we to choose? That's Kai Nielsen, I just quoted there. One of the challenges and charms of Star Trek is its provocation to recognize that as we take our place in the universe, the number of our discoveries of conflicting revelations of supposedly ultimate truths is likely to grow with every new species, every new culture with which we, just as the Star Trek crews do, might interact. Long since grown out of the militant rejection of religion in the public sphere, secularism in the later Star Trek series reminds us that the human adventure is just beginning, which is also my title, and I didn't state that, so I came all the way around, just like the next generation. Thank you very much. According to the fact that in good Back to the Future fashion, the final Next Generation episode, the crew members somehow time traveled back into the first episode. So I love that bookending that they did. All right. What would you like to talk about?
Questions, comments?
Yes.
I didn't find any much in my Google search, but I was wondering what Gene Roddenberry's, which figures influenced him intellectually. You mentioned Nietzsche.
You know, in no sense was Roddenberry a philosopher. Honestly, not even particularly an intellectual. If you take a very uncharitable look at the classic Star Trek, you'll see that many of the historical figures that are raised, many of the ideas that are raised kind of in caricature. I mean, the show is clearly a cerebral science fiction show, but even for that time, Abraham Lincoln, for example, speaks only things from his own speeches. It's very much a caricature. What Roddenberry seemed to have relied on the most was adventure stories at sea, with the particular sort of bourgeois heroic morality that a Horatio Hornblower character would have, and then his own personal experience in the armed forces. And so those were kind of the two major influences on him. Nothing philosophical particularly at all. So when I say Kirk is a Nietzschean figure, I'm simply trying to make sense out of Kirk's particular attitude toward religion in comparison to it.
He would have known Walter Kaufman when he was.
It's entirely possible since he, got a degree. I forget in what that he read Kaufman or something like that. There's no evidence. All the evidence that we have of the broader structure and philosophy of Star Trek comes with hindsight, right? So Roddenberry is interviewed at conventions and other places. There isn't stuff in the books about the making of the series that suggests that he was particularly philosophical about it in the way that somebody like a Joss Whedon is, or a J.J. Abrams simulates being. Yeah, Force Awakens is going to be great. That's pitched right at J.J.'s ability level, I think. So don't think too hard. What else? Yes?
So you distinguish different types of secularism.
Taylor's, right?
And it is Taylor's distinction.
Right.
And it's I can see it going a couple different ways. But the two distinctions that I sort of clued in on were the pluralistic version of secularism that celebrates diversity.
Right.
And then the other side or the other version or interpretation that celebrates reason and the falling off of religious practice.
Right.
So, in your estimation, I mean, just from the clips we watched, it seemed like Picard was openly hostile towards religious practice in that Next Generation clip. And then Cisco was more tolerant, more pluralistic.
Yeah.
is there sort of a trend you see among the different episodes, and where does the first series fit in here?
So there is a definite trend. I think that in an effort to make Deep Space Nine a more complicated show that has characters that are not just Starfleet. I mean, I mentioned, for example, that the individualism that often comes with the secular humanist label is mediated in the Star Trek series by the fact that they're all one crew, and so they always have their duty and they always have their mission, and that's typically what unites them. They get rid of that in Deep Space Nine, and as a result, I think they're able to challenge the kind of Enlightenment idea that the crew of reason is the perfect crew. If you privilege drama over good, tight, compact solutions, then Deep Space Nine is great about that. Voyager gets even better about it by having another character, Chakotay, be very reliant on his background in Native American spirituality. And just in general, I think the storylines, as you move along, get progressively kind of more tolerant, I guess you would say. And then in Enterprise, nothing. Any Enterprise fans here? Usually I don't get many of those. Religious themes in Enterprise almost entirely missing as far as I can see. And that seems strange to me because as the earliest series, it's the one closest to our period, and therefore we should be seeing exactly what's going on now, kind of predicated 50 years out in that show, but we don't. Anything come to mind from Enterprise? I just really, yeah, it just kind of ran out. But you know, the original series doesn't really know what it wants to think. It itself is kind of a caricature of secular humanism in many respects. Maybe 20 years ago, there was something to be gained as a free thinker from watching them. Today, the handling is not particularly sophisticated. Yeah, Scott?
So Kevin, would you say your argument is that in secular mindset, you need to accommodate as many truth claims as there are, and not allow for the possibility of an absolute truth claim?
No, because that's kind of a facile pluralism, isn't it? I think that there's, I'm a pragmatist, so I think that there's a good pragmatist route toward what I would say is maybe the lesson of Captain Sisko, which is that any particular claim cannot be ruled out a priori out of court. And in fact, what a healthy society, a healthy religious society in our century might be, which is what Sisko lives in, what he thinks he lives in at least, is one in which there are plenty of institutions for religious and non-religious claims and narratives to be bandied about, to the point where more and more people are exposed to them and are able to have voice. I know this sounds very cliche and everything, but what I'm talking about, of course, is the fact that religion plays a significant role still in civil society, much more so than in politics, where in some cases, if you say the wrong thing religiously in politics, you know, you're just dead in the water. I think religious ties in civil society, so we're talking about institutions that are not necessarily political, because that's really where secularism has been targeted, right, is toward the political and the legal. That is really the main vanguard of it. So I'm not sure if I really answered your question or not, but I do think that readings like Habermas's and Taylor's on the value of religion within secularizing societies is probably on the right track. Yeah. Other questions? Boxers, briefs? Boxer briefs. That's just a question I always hope I'm asked. Yes?
How do hostile races fit into the religious tolerance concept?
Oh, good one. Can you name one that you might not know?
Green, Cardassians, Borg, etc.
Green first. That's pretty damn impressive. How do they fit in, right? Well, let me ask you this question. When you're confronting a a hostile civilization, they themselves have declared war on you, let's say, or been aggressive with you, how quickly do you consider what their religion is, right? Or are there other more pressing concerns that one must deal with first, right? The reason for the aggression is really immaterial at that point, right? Klingons seem to be one of those races where if you tried to tear the politics and the religion apart, you wouldn't be able to do it. You know who the emperor of the Klingons is? Kahless. And he's actually been resurrected through the power of cloning from the original Kahless thousands of years ago, right? And Kahless is like the Roman Empire, not only the state, the head of state, but also a religious figure. He's worshipped, he's venerated. So that's a particular case in which you could not separate the two.
And the Klingons have their whole concept of honor.
They do.
Too.
They do.
So I guess that could be considered religious and political in their society.
It is, because their concept of honor is not entirely secular. There are secular conceptions of honor, for example, in Roman society. Roman culture is very animated by an idea of honor. For the Klingons, the need to maintain your honor, as I'm sure you well know, extends out beyond your death, so that you can go through the Klingon version of purgatory and end up at Sto-Vo-Kor.
I remember watching an interesting Next Generation episode where Worf loses the ability to walk.
Yeah.
And asks, I think he asks Riker to kill him in a Klingon ceremony.
Right. Why?
Because I guess in the Klingon society, if you lose the ability to battle, then your life as a Klingon is essentially.
You've lost your honor. And the most interesting thing about that is that Worf didn't do anything to lose his own honor. Right? It's this remarkable Klingon idea almost of moral luck of Bernard Williams, of the fact that something that is most important to your authentic self, your honor, can be taken away from you through no fault of your own.
Right.
Yeah.
I remember at the end of that episode, they do some crazy miracle surgery against his ability to
They grow him a new spinal column.
Right.
You've heard of the Deus Ex Machina, right? Yeah. Watch Doctor Who, it's all Deus Ex Machina. A solution for that. That's a really good question. It's a very good question. And a lot of the issues about war, I think if we viewed some of those issues that he has with being the only Klingon and otherwise most of the human crew as more religious and less just cultural difference, I think it would make Worf a very much more interesting character. He's often used as comic relief,
Right.
and I don't think he would be like that if we look at it in its more serious
And
perspective.
watching a lot of other episodes that involve Klingons, they often consider him dishonored because apparently before the series started, when he was on the Enterprise, he left the Klingon High Council. In that sense, he's got dishonor to just follow him.
It's true. And his father was also guilty of something here, right?
Well,
And
it turns out that another Klingon house lied about that.
Right.
It was like treason to Romulans or something.
Right. Yeah. So importantly for the Klingons, their ethical conception of honor is rooted in a kind of transcendental base, which is living in honor is important to getting into the afterlife, which every Klingon wants to do.
So in this discussion of the Klingons, I mean, I'm just thinking ISIS.
Hold on. Well, I will say that the Bajorans, there are more terrorists in the Bajoran people in the various shows than in any other race, much more so than the Klingons per se. And part of the reason for that is that the Bajorans lived under occupation, and their very notion of there being a separation between means and ends starts to fray.
Right. I watched an episode in this thing of trust Muslims
Well, you all can leave me.
in the concept of ISIS.
Yeah.
There's a Bajoran member on the Enterprise that's an ensign, and they have to help. She is the one that's helping track down Bajoran terrorists. And because of this, the whole Enterprise crew has to gain trust with her. It's a really interesting episode that I'm sure was based off real world stuff.
She's a Bajoran, so how can she track Bajoran terrorists and be professional and neutral about that?
Yeah.
Interesting.
It was interesting, yeah.
Yes.
Because just the final one, like species-specific ideas of like religion and how it can appear in different ways and necessarily called religion. What I find really interesting would be a study in the beliefs of Vulcans, where they place everything on logic. But part of that is they do have a very specific set of things they consider logical. These are their logical basis from which they build everything. A lot of their traditions, like arranged marriage, etc., are informed by that logic. And I'm not saying that the logic is necessarily flawed or not true logic, but they treat it a lot like religion.
They do. Spock is the most, I'm going to say, Spock is the most spiritual character in classic Star Trek. At least if you follow him into the movies, right? Because in the movies, he's in a continuous process of realizing precisely what you said, which is that logic is incomplete. In Star Trek The Motion Picture, when he makes contact with V'ger, he recognizes at that point that there's something more that his logic does not encompass. And then who is the artist that he likes, that he collects later in one of the later movies? Mark Chagall. Chagall is a great religious artist. Yes, sir.
So I don't know much about the history of the Star Trek universe, but when and how was the Prime Directive formulated?
So in the Ultimate Star Trek and Philosophy book coming out early next year, please buy one, there's a whole section on the Prime Directive. And obviously there were some mentions of it here as well. The Prime Directive is there in between Enterprise, which is set in the early 22nd century, and the classic series, which is about 50 or 70 years later, I forget. And the big event that happens in between those is a war with the Romulans. So what I'm guessing is that contact with some alien races through that war, if I remember the history correctly, helped to build the Federation, but the attempted contact with other civilizations that are less technologically advanced, which is what the Prime Directive is about, went horribly wrong. And as a result, they realized that they needed a kind of criteria. In fact, they stole their criteria for who the Prime Directive applies to from the Klingons. If you've seen the movie First Contact, the Next Generation one with the Borg, the Vulcans are just waiting around in orbit around Earth until they see one advanced sign of technology, which is what? The warp drive. The warp drive. Once you've gotten warp drive, now you're technologically equivalent with them, and as a result, they make contact at that point, even though they have their pointy eyes on Earth for quite a while.
The Prime Directive, does it have something to do with meddling with alien cultures, or am I off?
It's almost entirely based, and you know, when we were putting the book together, the series editor Bill Irwin said, "Would you like to do a blog?" And I was like, first of all, I said, "What's that?" And then secondly, I said, "Okay, I'll do one." And I did it about the Prime Directive, and I'm mystified about what moral force, maybe you guys can enlighten me about this, what moral force having equivalent technology really has. I mean, why is that morally significant? Because the Prime Directive is held, as you see, by people like Picard, as not just being a rule that they need to adhere to, but it's more like something requiring complex moral judgment. Now, why is it that you're on par with the society when you have the same technology with them, and therefore there's no immoral meddling, which is what the Prime Directive forbids, right? It seems strange to me. It seems remarkable, I think, in the context of the late 1960s, when everything was being framed in terms of Vietnam, flower children, or the Cold War. It seems remarkable to have kind of presaged late 80s, early 90s multiculturalism, which, I don't know, maybe the person that came up with that originally, which just seems a crazy thing to say, was thinking of the Prime Directive, right? Because we were effectively saying there have to be some constraints on action to preserve something that might be culturally contaminated, presumably by this higher technology.
Isn't it the assumption of moral progressivism that's at work here? I mean, the idea is that the moral progressive has not only the obligation, but in a way the leisure to condescend to helpless rubes that that aren't in the position that the moral progressive.
Those are the exact arguments in the various series against the Prime Directive. Yeah, you're dead on there. And also this kind of bizarre view that there are stages to the moral progressivism, and therefore the skip would be fatal, which is almost a given. Yes?
But back in the 60s, because of technological advances, they were also starting to have first contact with tribes that were really decimated and horribly impacted by that first contact of jumping ahead several centuries of technology. And I always wondered if maybe, you know, some of that, of just that interweaving the two levels of technology was happening at that time here on this planet.
That makes good sense. That makes good sense. I can't watch Who Watches the Watchers, the Next Generation episode, without thinking of cargo cults in the Pacific and the worshiping of luggage and things like that. Can't figure that out. Good point. Okay. I need to advance my knowledge of anthropology and sociology beyond Ruth Benedict. But she shows up in so many of our philosophy. Any other questions, comments? Yes?
I was wondering your thoughts on if there is actually any room for religious discussion in the secularist society. I mean, I guess what would be the point in the secularist society?
What would be the point?
If there's no absolute truth.
If there's no absolute truth. Well, I would say that insofar as there are religions that don't operate with the conception of absolute truth, but rather of some sort of intersubjective view of truth, then that would be possible. I will say that I think that the justification of democracy, if the justification of democracy morally, politically, legally invokes absolute truth, then I think you're in danger of losing democracy fairly soon after.
Depending on who's running it.
What's that?
Depending on who's running it.
Depending on who's running it. You know, there's a great book that illustrates, it's not by Philip Kitcher, forgetting the author, but that illustrates how the conceptions of democracy and scientific fallibilism kind of interweave with each other through their growth in the 18th century. And so, you know, there just is something about liberal democracy and this conception of fallibilism that seem to resonate with people. I don't know if they have to go together, but fallibilism would be skeptical, I guess, of the absolute truth of justification. And people like Richard Rorty, who, you know, gets a lot of bad press even though he's dead, believed that democracy was perfectly capable of being justified in kind of a bootstrapping way, and that wasn't circular in any bad way, etc. But that's Rorty. Rorty's crazy. Everybody knows Rorty's crazy. I stood outside a bathroom once where he had gone inside to go to the bathroom at Northwestern because I wanted to get him to sign my copy of Imagining Our Country. And I felt bad about that because he shouldn't lay in wait for somebody to come out of the bathroom. Yes?
I'm interested, as a political philosopher, if you like watching Star Trek, do they ever talk about the problems with the Prime Directive? Because you said there are some moral difficulties embedded in it and sort of immortalized in it because it is an old document. Do they ever compare that to the Constitution and talk about how a particular set of cultural values tend to be immortalized in a document that lasts a lot longer than that culture?
You know, that's exactly what they don't do with the Prime Directive, which in many ways they treat as sacred. And let me qualify that really quickly. Some people, typically Starfleet admirals, treat it as sacred in the sense that it is inviolable. You know, you just can't, if you ever violate it, then you're automatically in trouble, right? That's why it's the Prime Directive. It's treated as sacred in a slightly different sense by captains like Picard and Kirk. They realize that the Prime Directive is not a firm rule that absolutely dictates what one should do in every context. Therefore, it requires interpretation. And in one of the interesting chapters, since I'm alluding to other chapters in the Ultimate Star Trek book for you, there's a great chapter about virtue ethics and leadership, and about how when we look at Kirk from the classic series, we see somebody who usually gets it right because his judgment is good as a result of his training, his education, his intuitions, etc. Compare that to Chris Pine's Captain Kirk, who doesn't get it right hardly ever. He just gets away with it. And the author of that particular chapter, who by the way is named J.J. Abrams, not the J.J. Abrams I was just making fun of, but points out that these are really completely different Kirks when it really comes down to it, because one has good judgment that interprets the Prime Directive in authentic ways, and the other one just disregards it. Good question.
So is the difference between the two Kirks then that the original Kirk is still shaped by, I don't know, we might say traditional conceptions of morality and character, whereas the Pine Kirk is a postmodern sensibility?
I see where you're going with that. Yes, and what I would do is I would map onto that the original Kirk is, over the course of the 3 years of the show, made out to be an exceptional leader because he came from tragic circumstances. It's made clear that he was an orphan. It's made clear that many members of his family have died in service of Starfleet, etc. So while he doesn't sit there and moan about it, that's just not his place. In many ways, he's designed to win and lose at the same time. City on the Edge of Forever, what rated by most fans as being the top of the classic ones, is the one where he loses Edith Keeler, the woman who can't live because if she lives, Hitler wins. Have you seen this episode? Set back in the 30s, something like that. It's really well written. It's written by Harlan Ellison. The new Kirk is broken. The new Kirk also is an orphan and comes from a tragic background, but he's actually broken as a result of that. And so I kind of see his kind of frivolous leadership style as being kind of lashing out in some respects.
In a weird way, the Pine Kirk is more in tune with the stereotype of the 60s than the original Kirk is.
I would think so. Because the original Kirk is also made out to be somebody who's very interested in history, very interested in tradition. He keeps an old weapon collection, you know. He's definitely not a 60s, youth leader, that's for sure. Yes?
Based on that, I love the Horatio Hornblower analogy.
Yeah, and that's Roddenberry, not me. So.
And I love that series too, but that's, to me, what I see the difference in them, is that Kirk exemplifies maybe that ship's captain with that naval, admiralty code, where the Chris Pine character doesn't have that at all. And so my hope is that maybe in his service he begins to grow into that, because we're seeing Kirk kind of midway through his career in the original TV series. But to me, that there's a huge gap between that naval officer, that ship's captain, and what we're seeing in these new movies.
Right. Yeah, that's a really good point. Kirk acts more like a fighter pilot. He's got more of the the Top Gun kind of vibe about it. But you're right. Kirk could easily be sea captain. Sure. Somebody over here.
Yeah, well, I was just thinking that it can also be a criticism of a traditional concept of masculinity that's occurring in the earlier shows, in which the male is the leader who has absolute knowledge and questions, versus contemporary understanding of what it means to be a leader isn't necessarily one in which you know exactly what you're doing. So it's that feminist criticism saying, look, they're always flying by the seat of their pants. It's only a pretense that they know what they're doing.
That's a really good point. I mean, that itself, folds into the kind of postmodern critical conception. Do we want to sympathize with him when he doesn't have all the answers? Well, that's up to you. That's kind of the message. That's why maybe I don't like him as much as some people do. I need somebody to sympathize with. They keep changing doctors. Yeah.
Is there an intentional connection between the character of Q and the Old Testament Yahweh or Jehovah? I read certain interpretations of Yahweh or Jehovah as being kind of this arbitrary, cruel, capricious God. Non-believers would interpret Yahweh of the Old Testament in that fashion. I see that in Q. I was wondering if there's maybe an intentionality in that depiction.
Well, Roddenberry wrote the first Q episode in Counter and Farpoint, which kicked off Next Generation. Yeah, I mean, you know, that's the God that Roddenberry wants to fight, as David Gerald said. I think you're exactly right about that. What's interesting, of course, is that Q's character is humanized over the course of that show, and he becomes a much more sympathetic character in many respects. As typically happens in TV and movie sci-fi now, the way you do this is by, and I'm thinking of you in the math of the feminist critique right now, is that you humanize them, okay? Bring them into my culture. I'm not going to live in Q's type of terms, you know, Q will live on my type of terms. Yeah, I think that Q represented that, and it's hard to like Q as a secondary character after that first episode, but then as other writers and other producers get hold of them, they realize that if they get rid of the Old Testament bad connotation that you talk about, then they have a very interesting dramatic character. He's supposedly omnipotent, but he's clearly not omniscient and definitely not benevolent.
Sure. And the episodes in which he is featured, I mean, they can be some of the most frustrating to watch, you know, because he's all over the place.
Yeah.
Unpredictable.
That's right. The other thing that I think Q has going on is an allusion to Greek mythology rather than the Old Testament, in which the gods 99% of the time appear to humans in some sort of disguises, and often bizarre ones, like Zeus turning into a goose so that he can impregnate children, etc. Anyway, and Q does that too. That's his typical modus operandi, at least in the first few episodes. He likes to mock the whole Greek mythology thing and Starfleet by showing up in their uniforms. And Picard hates that. Picard says, "You haven't heard those stripes